Hello, and thank you for stopping by my channel, Valachan, Less Than Guru. Uh, my name is Lehman Crafton, known in the interwebs as Valachan. I decided to make some videos, started with tutorials on how to set up specifically Torg Eternity games in Roll20. Since then, I've decided to expand a little and go over different thoughts and things that I have about tabletop role-playing games and ideas and just kind of uh, my thoughts and views. Um, Having said that, I know that there are plenty of channels out there, and many of them have much better production values than mine. I like to say I have no production values because it's just me and my camera with the built-in mic and about, say, 30 or so plus years of gaming knowledge that I've accumulated. Um, I don't want to say that I'm an expert, thus the less than guru, but I do have points of views that maybe will be interesting to you. And it's always nice to get different views from different people. I see a lot of terminology and new things that, like when I started playing over 30 years ago, that we called it by different names, or we just assumed things or kind of knew they existed, but now they kind of actually have defined names. So there's a lot of things that over the course of time that I will probably do little videos now and then about specific games that I've played and ideas that I liked about them or disliked about them. And as with anything, everybody has their own opinion. So if I like something you don't like, that's fine. If you like something I don't like, that's fine too. Everybody has different views, different opinions, different things that they like. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as with tabletop role playing, we enjoy what we're doing and we enjoy the groups that we're with, the game masters and players, and everybody has some place to fit in, even if you might not like somebody. Play style wise, within a group, there's usually other groups around and things like that. So I wanted to first do this as kind of like an intro video to myself. You might have seen some Ulysses Spiel YouTube videos that I was on some interviews when I was going through some of writing with the Tharcold Wave, which I really enjoyed that. And so because of that, because of some of my tutorials for Torg, I decided to just kind of expand things. So my professional side of things is I don't really consider myself a professional, but I am published. And that includes self-published, unofficial published by actual game companies, and official publications. Um, so I'll go through, start from the beginning, uh, my how I got into tabletop role playing, and then once I get closer to when I actually started doing things self-publishing and how that switched over to official publishing, or officially being published, I guess is a better term. Then you'll kind of understand where I come from and maybe decide that you want to stick around, and as I throw up videos you might want to watch. So basically, I lived in a extremely small town. And when I say I lived in a small town, I mean actually the town was so small I lived a couple miles outside of town. But that town had a population at the time of 198. And the only way that it actually grew above 200 was it annexed land outside of its border. So it actually got bigger. And that's how it got more people. So where I came from, we had to drive on the school bus 20 minutes to get to the high school, and actually the junior high was even farther. That took probably about 30 minutes. So there were no real game shops around. There were no gamers, things like that. We had a small little mall at the intersection of two highways, and there was a bookstore in that mall. And in that bookstore, there was a tiny little section of it. This is, of course, way pre-internet. Buy what you need on online stores and have it shipped directly to you. I had to drive, or my parents at the time had to drive to a mall, go into a physical bookshop. And then I looked, and basically what they had was they had some D&D stuff, and it was all mix of box sets, the BECMI, BECMI, and some AD&D, different adventures and stuff, all just kind of mixed around. And I want to say that I was probably around 12 to 13 at the time. And one of my friends had another friend, and he's like, hey, let's do this thing called role playing. And from my background as a kid, I liked G.I. Joe, I liked He-Man, I liked Transformers. Those were the big things at the time. Voltron. Um, and we would take our action figures and go to friends and play, GI Joe or Transformers or Mask or whatever. And he's like, "Hey, here's something." So my imagination was good, but I never experienced role playing, tabletop role playing. And we went through some D&D thing. And I say some D&D thing because I don't know if it was AD&D or the basic expert or BECMI thing, but it was some form of D&D, and the game master, we're all, like I said, either 12 or 13 years old. We have no clue what's going on. I never picked up a book. It was one of those where it was like, hey, roll these dice here. This is your strength. Here's your intelligence, etc. Oh, you can be a fighter. Okay, you're a fighter. And the game master had a module, but I think he just used maps. I don't think he actually looked in the adventure and read anything. He just saw the maps and was like, hey, okay, I'm going to throw some mummies in here and stuff. All I remember is that I had a first level fighter. We encountered mummies. I got my butt kicked, and I hated role playing. And it stayed like that for a few years. And like I said, I was into G.I. Joe, and I was getting the Marvel comics, and I'm going through Marvel comics. And a few years have passed, and like I said, comics, I'm into G.I. Joe, and TV shows, I'm into again, this will show my age, 47 at the time of this recording, that I considered a cartoon. It was a Robotech. Yes, it's anime now. Back then it was a cartoon called a cartoon. Later on, when I got into college, it was Japanimation, and then it's anime. So terminology changes. So if I happen to say cartoon, I'm not there to offend anybody. It's just I was 13 to 15 at the time. That's what I knew it as. That's what I called it. I will try to be modern, but I don't always watch every video, or I what I want to say. I don't always keep up on terminology. I kind of have my own way of thinking, but hopefully you'll understand. So I was into Robotech, and I'm looking at G.I. Joe comics, and there's this full-blown ad for a role-playing game of Robotech by Palladium Books. And like I said, I hated D&D. I had my one or two, I can't remember. Maybe it was so traumatic I blocked it. But I had my very short D&D experience, hated it, hated role-playing. And I saw this Robotech ad. It was an absolutely beautiful picture, artwork, full page, in color by Kevin Long. And I was like, I like Robotech. This might be interesting. If nothing else, it was like, it has stats for the SDF-1, it has stats for the Veritex and Destroids and stuff. And yes, I'm using the older terms that they use because that's what I grew up with, and my absolute love for Robotech has faded over time. So I'll just say that I went to my mom, begged her to actually write out a check and mail it because, again, no internet. And a few weeks later, I got a Robotech book, and I read it, devoured it, and started role playing Robotech. Um, at the time, I didn't understand levels. It was a level based game similar to D&D, and I didn't understand the purpose of levels. I was like, I just want to have this guy be this level, so I'm making a fifth level Veritech fighter, and his boss, who's the squadron leader, I'll make him seventh level, and here's a new guy, he's first level. Um, Again, I'm from a town, or outside of a town of 198 people. There is nobody to play. I pay my brother 25 cents to play. 25 cents really wasn't a lot back then either. I'm not that old. But we played, and when a friend or two of mine would come over, and that's my cat Mars. Say hi, Mars. He thinks anytime I talk that he needs to be in my lap. So sorry, but he's just going to be part of the scenery. So basically, every once in a while, a friend would come over, make up a character, we'd do some Robotech, they'd have scenarios, and each time a new book would come out, and how we knew new books would come out was in the back of the Palladium books, they would talk about future books. And love or hate Palladium, and I've gone through both during my life, they were always we're going to advertise something and then it might be delayed. But they were always good at that time when you sent your physical check in the mail, because there was no internet. They would increase the page count sometimes, which would increase the book cost, but they never wrote me or said, "Oh, we're canceling your thing because you only paid X amount. You only paid your $9.95, and it's actually a $15 book." Now, they always just sent it to me at whatever their advertised price to be announced was. So in that, I have a great. That's part of my love part of Palladium books is throughout my entire youth, before college, coming in the mail would be Robotech books. And they were just wonderful at treating a probably 14, 15-year-old to an 18-year-old kid who adored them. They were great. I would write letters asking questions, handwritten, because I didn't have a computer. I didn't even have a typewriter for a long time. So handwritten letters, and Kevin would scribble answers in the margins and send it back. So I loved that. I thought that was cool. But to continue, I then go to high school, and in one of my art classes, I'm doing some Robotech art. And one of the other students in the class, she was an older student. I was probably a sophomore at the time, and she was probably a senior. She's like, "Oh, you like that? My boyfriend likes that." And I was like, "Oh, cool." So like, with her as a middle person, I never met the guy, but I bought a couple of the Matchbox toys for her because I was buying the toys and stuff. And she was like, "Hey, uh, do you like role playing?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I like role playing." And she told me where a role playing shop was, and it was called FBN, Fly By Night Role Playing. It was down on Main Street in St. Charles. Again, 30 to 40 minutes drive away, because that's how far away I lived. To put it in perspective, if you've ever heard of Daniel Boone, my area that I grew up is really close to that, and it hasn't changed much since then. Like I like to say, if you don't know who he is, look him up. And that's what kind of I'm living out in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods. Moved there when I was 10 until I went to college. So had to go to this FBN bookshop. It's moved now. I think it's just called the Fantasy Shop, Fantasy Shop at FBN. It moved kind of changed its names, but there was a old man there. I remember going the first time. He had a big fat cat in the shop. It sold comics and role playing games. They had a whole shelf full of Palladium games, and that is when I was like, oh wow, they sell more than Robotech. And I saw the Palladium Fantasy role playing game, and I picked it up and I read it. And having played my disastrous D&D, liking Robotech, I saw the Palladium Fantasy and I read it and I liked it. And it, to me, and again, it's my opinion. If you like old school D&D, if you like new school D&D, wonderful. To me, certain things that didn't make sense at that age. Some of it still doesn't, but that's another story. Um, I liked the freedom that it gave me, and that is what Robotech introduced me to role playing. But the Palladium Fantasy role playing, and this is first edition, that's what sank its hooks in me and like pulled me in. Um, you could say it was the start of the downfall of Robotech in my mind, is the most awesome thing ever, and I got into fantasy after that. Um, Played many different systems. That was kind of like what caught me. Got into other Palladium books from there. Went to college, found a local uh, role playing club at the time, and the I won't say the leader of the club because he wasn't. He went to Purdue as a student, and he no longer was a student there. So to be a student club, you actually had to be a student. So we would elect presidents and vice presidents, but we played his unique system, um, Adventure Quest, AQ Jarn, Jaern. Sadly, the Daniel Lawrence, the person who wrote it, has passed away. But I do believe that if you look it up, a PDF of his, whatever the last edition or last printing of it changed since I went there, is online for you to peruse. It's an interesting take on old school D&D without levels, using what is called a base cost system, which I'll get into in a different video. This one's probably going to end up being long, and I don't want to take up way too much of your time. We'll see how that works. But I got into role-playing other games there. I got back into D&D at that time. Actually, before that, I had picked up some D&D, and that was with Palladium. I think Palladium First Edition, D&D, Basic, the BECME, AD&D, AD&D Second Edition are extremely close enough that any game master on the fly could convert in their head. Some people might not agree with me. All I know is that I was taking Palladium people, because Palladium didn't have a lot of adventures, and just opening up a D&D module and playing a Palladium game using beholders and, rust monsters and the like, which don't exist in the Palladium world, just because I didn't think that it was a difficult thing to do. You'd see an armor class and you just flip it. You take 20, and AC 0 is 20, so AC -2 is armor rating 22. You just do things like that on the fly. So this is early 90s when I go to college, and I get interested in other role-playing games and stuff like that. And then I started my love of Palladium. Wasn't quite hate, but it was getting dissatisfied. Level-based systems at the time were kind of irking me, and I was getting into things like Torg. And Torg is a system that I've played on and off. Game Master actually played a couple of times because I usually end up game mastering. But I loved Torg. And of all my systems that I've played and all the systems that I have this love-hate relationship with, Torg is the only one that has pretty much always been loved. It's the only one that when I had days where I'm like, I am never going to touch this system again because I'm so disappointed or so frustrated with it that Torg was never that. Torg was the only game that I was like, at any time somebody can say, Lehman, run a game, or Lehman, do you want to play a game? Torg is the only system that I will just say, yes, I will do it. Now, running games in Torg has been a few years and then off a few years off a few years, things like that. Not necessarily that I get burnt out, it's just that I like changes of pace, and even with Torg's multi-genre mashup, fantasy is my love, so I have to sometimes go back, kind of take a bath and shower in the fantasy, not just style, but all fantasy, and then kind of refreshes me to get back. But around that time, that game system, Adventure Quest, with the base cost system, I really like that. So I wanted to possibly produce my own game. So through the mid to late 90s, I was kind of percolating ideas and writing stuff down. And then from about 2003 to 2004, I just focused on writing. I use computer art programs like 3D model stuff, Poser, and DAS 3D to do my own artwork, because anybody that I talked to about doing art, some people just didn't want to do it, which is fine. I didn't have a lot of money. I'm a college student at the time, and just after college with student loan debt. So I didn't have a lot to pay as just a person, not even owning my own company. And other people would like maybe do a piece or something and then didn't. And again, that's fine. They had other priorities in life, and that happens. So I'm like, if I want art in this, I'm going to have to do it myself. And at one time I was a okay artist. I won't say good, because there was always, in my classes, there was always one or two people that were much better than me. Like, I can't draw a stick figure and they're doing the Sistine Chapel. So, no, it wasn't bad a stick figure. Now, if you want to see someone who can't draw a stick figure, that's my brother. So if you're watching this, Jason, no, you cannot draw stick figures. But I needed something a little more professional, and so I went to that. And that brings me up to my actual self-published game. I did it on, at the time, might still be linked with Drive-Thru RPG, but it's RPG now. And Dunamis was this is a copy I got printed at the time Kinko's. Now it's the FedEx store. It's right over 200 pages of failure. Because I thought, hey, if I sell 100 of these things, that'll be pretty decent. And I don't even know if I've sold, after 13 years, 100 of them. But it taught me a few things. I liked the system, but it was going from a time in the 90s where people were going for realistic stuff in a lot of games. And base cost is kind of a realistic tack in to things. And it was my anti-level type thing. And I wanted rules for everything, but not in a necessarily restrictive way. Like some systems have feats and things, and it kind of gets, hey, if you don't get this specific feat, then in this feat chain, you can't do it. And my game was more of you can do it, you just have to put some time and experience into it. And then after a while, if you don't like that, you can just move on and do this other thing. And this part isn't wasted because it's not no level, or there's not no really good, great grammar. There's no level limit to say you've reached 20th or 30th depending on which AD or which D&D edition, but there's no max limit. So you can do this, you can move over here, you can do whatever. But there was a lot of front-loaded stuff that needed to happen. It's a percentage-based system, and I wanted things a little more, not just the skill is based off of this one attribute. It's kind of like every skill is based off of 3 attributes, and then you get different, instead of levels of character levels, you get skill levels. And everything adds together, and then you roll a percentile, try to roll under it. Which is great for all of those people like I was at the time that loved to think about games and where it was like, this is how I plan my character, and this is how I'm going to do everything from now until, they're super awesome characters. And a lot of the feedback I was getting also, I was bringing some of Torg knowledge. Torg is one of the very few games that I ever was able to take a person who was brand new and give them the old style template from Torg and say, you want to be a Secullum priest, and here's your template, here's your ads, you're starting, and here's this other guy, and he is a priest of Dunad, and he's been playing the game for 10 years. And who knows how many possibilities he had, because we're talking old school, or possibilities or experience. Who knows how many he's accumulated and spent. And his skill adds are, 8 to 10, and he's raising attributes now at 3 times the attribute cost because he wants to go up. It's better for him to go up attributes. Where that person who first started could, now toe-to-toe they wouldn't win, but he could participate and he could actually do something in the game and move the game forward and not feel like an idiot until he had gained some possibilities or experience or things like that. So that was one of the things that I was trying to do with my game. And I do say it was a complete failure because it wasn't near the success that I wanted it to be. But I have read Stephen King's On Writing, and I guess he wrote in that, and maybe in some interviews, he said, you want to know what success is? If you get a check in the mail, because again, we're talking pre-internet or infancy of internet, at least the online shopping aspect, and checks and payments through electronic means. He basically said if you get a check, if you get payment for a work that you've published, and you're able to pay your electric bill and keep your lights on, then you're successful. And if that is a measure of being successful or not, then I've had success. And it's always been a hobby. I've never used it as I would like to maybe use it as I want to do this as my real, absolute, only great job. But then in that aspect, it was a success. So failure or success, it taught me some things. Like I said, it was on that cusp of where I had taken all the stuff of the 90s, early mid 90s, where things were kind of like getting realistic. Let's do this because it's real. Let's do this because it's real. And around 2000, there, at least to me, and I could be off, you could find something and say, hey, this article states all these things, and this is, these are the real dates when things happen, or you're completely wrong. I'm going off of my experience and games that I was looking at during these years. But things then went to, let's get it streamlined. Let's get things easy. Let's get things, let's get out the clutter and the clunk. And that possibly could have hurt mine, because it's definitely not streamlined. It's for people who want to spend a lot of time thinking about their characters and how they level and things like that. For that, it's great. If you like math heavy systems, at least figuring out um, what percentages and stuff you need to roll. Now in combat and stuff, I don't think it's too math heavy more than any other system, but that pre that building the character and advancing the character up percentages and figuring stuff out is different. Each of the different mystics, and I always use the term mystic when I'm talking about psionics, magic, and miracles, divine, because a lot of things will say, okay, this spellcaster is doing magic, this priest is doing miracles, this psychic's doing psionics, but then they'll say this is only affected by magic. But then they have examples where a psychic's doing something. So I take all of that non-mundane things that and call it mystic. Each of the mystic things has its own uh, way of doing things, which I always thought, and in my view, if I had the time now, I would probably do it that way. I would make each a different type of system because they're different otherwise. Just have them all be the same. Have your clerics and ADD do the exact same thing wizards do, because if they're all magic, it's magic. So that was my first thing. A few years later, I got back into Palladium. My hate, which for a few years it was kind of like anytime Palladium, nope, not listening. And I kind of got back into Palladium, and I wanted to use some of my school knowledge. And to let you know, I have a degree in anthropology, so I wanted to take some anthropology stuff and put that into a modern setting, like I use Beyond the Supernatural, second edition. And I read a lot of things about like the old skeptic Randy. His last name is Randy. I want to say John, but that's not true. But he did a lot of debunking of people claiming to do real magic and psychic phenomenal and stuff like that. James Randi. And I was reading a lot of his stuff. And the Palladium BTS second edition is interesting because don't think Kevin Simbita took it. I don't think he probably read James Randi or anything, because it's presented as magic and psychic stuff is real, but he had certain things that kind of touched me at the time. It was like the best people to debunk fake magicians and psychics are magicians, because they understand how illusions work. They understand the tricks of the trade, how to get people to think one thing when something else. And an ethical magician will never say, I'm a real magician, I do real magic. They'll say, I'm an illusionist, or yeah, it's an illusion type thing. So they had professions in the BTS second edition that were like, besides the nega psychic, but they had things that you could be a stage magician. And I thought that was interesting, that you could actually like have a psychic character that pretends he's not psychic. And the system was designed pretty cool in that aspect. And I wanted to take some of my anthropology knowledge and kind of do that and expand on the mundane, because in the article I wrote was the mundane is not boring, because I couldn't come up with a zinger. I tried. It was just like, well, the whole point of this is the mundane does not have to be boring, because again, a lot of people that know Palladium books, everything bigger, 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 more powerful, 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 and that's where they get the power gamer munchkin tag added to them. And I wanted to try to focus and say some of this mundane stuff is pretty interesting. And a game master with the BTS being investigation, it might play into things. You might use your anthropology, like, cultural anthropology or even archaeology, dig sites, kind of work like CSI. And then my brother, at the time, he still does. He works at a crime lab as a criminalist. And so I was asking him some questions like, how does this work? How does this work? And he was, giving me answers. So basically, I took how to use real world knowledge in a gaming modern setting. What things do you have to worry about? It's not like in a fantasy game where you storm the castle, you kill everybody, and you leave. And as long as you're the biggest, baddest person, you do things. You start doing that in the real world, you're going to have governments after you, especially if government, has a X-Files type thing, where they know this stuff can be real. You start stepping on toes. So start using, your spell and psychic to clean up crime scenes if you do stuff and things like that. And I started doing a lot of other things. So Palladium at the time, and for a long time they had a series of books that came out called The Rifter, which some of it was official, but a lot of it was, majority was not official things, was just things that fans came up with, they sent in, and if Palladium Books liked them, then they would publish it and give you a little money for it. So in this Rifter 55, let's see if I can. Oops, mundane doesn't mean boring. Lehman Crafton Jr. right there. So published by somebody else, not myself. So that made me feel good. When one of my friends went to the game store and was like, "Hey, look, your name, your thing's here." That wasn't something that I just threw on Drive-Thru RPG. RPG Now and decided to sell. That was somebody that a publisher was like, "I like what you did, and no, it's not official, but it's going to be in something I publish." So I really liked that. It was my first submission to a publishing company, a tabletop role-playing game publisher and game company, and it really was awesome. It was like, wow, X many years of gaming, and I finally, somebody likes my work enough to pay me for it. So time passes. That was apparently from when I looked before I started video, 2010. So I didn't do anything more. It wasn't necessarily because I didn't want to. It just, life happens, and role-playing kind of, even though it's a big part of my life, it is different now than when I'm in my late 30s and 40s than it was when I was in my 20s and seemed to have all the time in the world to think about role-playing and do role-playing things, and now it's not as easy to take that time. So years pass, and probably around 2016, 2017-ish, early 2017, I wanted to get into Torg again. I just had oh wow, if I want to do Torg, and I was thinking I need to split the possibilities from experience. So I was working with ways on how to do that. And then I somehow stumbled across that Ulysses Spiel was putting together a new Torg Eternity. Now, I will say, and maybe I'll do a future video, certain things after Torg got sold by West End Games and went through a few companies. Certain aspects, when I would read, I was like, man, I don't like that, so I'm going to stick with old Torg. But Ulysses Spiel, I had encountered them in the mid-90s. I actually went to Germany a few times and had bought a board game for the Das Schwarze Auge. And I bought some of their Das Schwarze Auge role-playing games. and use my very, very poor semi-taught, self-taught German to translate in the German dictionary, which was a physical book because, again, we did not have Google Translate. And I liked it. I never actually played the role-playing game. I did get enough out of the rules for the board games to hopefully play them how they were supposed to be played, but they were fun. And I like them as a company. So when they came out with Torg Eternity, when they were talking about it, my ears perked up, and I was interested. And I went to they had their own forums at the time, and I started participating in the forums. And a lot of the things that they were saying, I was like, I agree with that. I agree possibilities and experience should be split. My reasons might be different from other people. Other people might not have liked that for their own reasons, but for me, my game master style, my group, I kind of like that. And certain other aspects I like. Now there was other things that I think that in their attempt to streamline things, certain things were streamlined, but there were other things that added more complicated things. But I really liked Torg Eternity, and when it came out, I did a Kickstarter, and I will say that Torg Eternity was the first Kickstarter that I ever did, and it's the only since that time the only Kickstarters, any crowdfunding things I have done have been for Torg. That's how much I like the system. Otherwise, I wait for it to come out because I don't. Yes, Mars, I'm gonna pay attention to you a little. Otherwise, I usually wait for it to come out because I don't want to pledge something and then not have it work out, like what has happened with so many other games. But when I got that big box, the cargo box, or Delphi Council cargo box for Torg Eternity, I opened it up and fell in love. I loved old Torg too. So when I'm looking at Torg and I'm looking at old Torg and trying to mix the two, I ask, they bring upon the Infiniverse Exchange on Drive-Thru RPG, which allows people to write and set up, and you do all your layout and everything, but you set up a product for Torg Eternity. And I said, hey, can I do something and go from take all the cool stuff I like about Torg Eternity that you came up with, Cosm cards, things like that, but write it for Torg. And they're like, no, we only do conversions the one way, not the other way. So we'll allow you to go from Torg to Torg Eternity, but we won't allow you to go from Torg Eternity to Torg. And that sealed it in my head to, okay, because I'm thinking, do I do one, do I do the other, do I do one? I'd started the campaign with my changes, and my group had did both, and none of us could decide which we actually liked better. We liked aspects of both of them. So I'm like, well, let me look at all the stuff that I missed from Torg that I felt was vital, or just was missing, because source books for Torg had already been out. It was a 5-year run that had all these source books and everything, and Torg Eternity had Torg Eternity core book and a couple of Delphi Council missions, and that was about it. So there was gaps that needed to be filled, and I'm like, I can fill some of those gaps, and maybe people will like this Infiniverse Exchange thing. So I was going to do one for Living Land, one for Nile, etc. And I just decided go big or go home. So I wrote a big thing for the Infiniverse Exchange called the Paraverse, which is an alternate timeline. I'm a big proponent of taking a game, making it your own. canon is good for establishing what an overall theme is, but every group should deviate from canon in some way, because if you don't, you're just watching a movie and making remarks about things that are happening in the sidelines. My opinion. I say make the game your own. If you need to kill off somebody, kill off somebody. If you need to bring something new, bring something new. If you need to just completely ignore something because you don't like it, ignore it. It's not a problem for you and your game. The company is writing for everybody. They have to take that into mind. You're not. You're playing for your game. But I wanted to do something that anybody, Game Master players, would have choices to do. So I presented this Paraverse. And a little bit after that, Deanna Gilbert from Ulysses Spiel said, hey, anybody who's been writing these Infiniverse Exchange projects, if you would be interested in writing for us, let us know. And I was like, yes, I'm interested. And didn't hear anything for a while. Okay. So I want to say it was either really late 2018 or really early 2019. I get an email saying, hey, do you want to do Relics of Power? Help, not do the whole thing. And for anybody who's a Torg fan at all, original Torg, Relics of Power was the adventure that defined Torg. It was a 3-part adventure. It had one of the first part came with the Game Master's screen. It was the all-to-end-all Torg adventure. Highly praised. Fans love it. They're going to redo it, not just stat-wise, but reskin, well, even like Frankenstein it, pull everything apart, throw away stuff, put things together. Keep this name, but move it over here. Things like that. It's like a completely reimagined story, but with that important elements that the original Relics of Power had. And I'm like, yes, I would like to do this. And they had already written the first 2 acts at the time, so they gave us the drafts, me and a couple other people. And they're like, okay, we need these 3 acts done, and you guys choose what you want to do. And they had Isle, Tharkold, and Cyber Papacy. And if you've been here since the beginning, which if you're, I doubt that you just were like, I'm going to skip to X amount of time, 48 minutes to start there, you know that I love fantasy. When I was a player, my short time that I actually played before I became a game master for life for Torg, I was a priestess, a Dunad. I just love fantasy. I loved Isle, but one of the authors is from England. And I thought, I will mess this up if I do England, because I know some parts. Like I said, I'm anthropologist, I know geography, I know history, but it's not what a person from there knows. I will do it wrong. And Cyber Papacy was a little strange. It's in France, and my name is French, but that's about it. So I'm like, I'll do Tharkold, because at the time I was married to a Russian, and I've been to Russia, I've been to Ukraine, I know the history, and I really was understanding a lot of that, how it would work with politics now in Russia, and the genre, which is so mixed, because when people look at Tharkold and Tor Eternity, they're like, what is it? You're saying Mad Max here, and you're saying Terminator here, and I don't understand what it is. Well, it's a mix of everything. It depends where you are. If you look at Russia, um, it's a lot like when I grew up. I told you my small town um, of 198. You have those areas in Russia, wilderness between cities. So your cities are one thing, your wilderness is the other. You have your areas are different. So depending where you are and what takes form there, it can be a very different experience. So I'm like, I have this background. I can do the Tharkle part. Um, so I did, and the three of us did our things. And one of the weird things, which worked out perfectly, is whenever you have a MacGuffin and you got three of them, you don't want each one to be the same thing. And when we completed our things and read each other's, they were all different, and that was wonderful. So it wasn't just I get the first part, I get the second part, I get the third part, and I do the same thing each time. Really, three different acts, which brings up this Relics of Power Redux. This is my official published work. So starting with self-published, someone else published, but unofficial, and then actual published by somebody else, a company, game company, and it's official. So that Relics of Power Redux, the Tharkhold Act I did, led me to do a lot more in Tharkhold. And the Ulysses Spiel team is wonderful to work with. Everybody there is just open to ideas and everything. I'm not affiliated with them beyond being a freelancer and doing some interviews and some stuff like that, and some little work, side work here and there. I'm not an employee or anything, so my views are different in a lot of things, but they're on track. They sync with a lot of the people there. If you've seen the Ulysses Spiel YouTube videos that were happening around Ulysses Con, you'll see that Daryl and I both have a nice agreement of making toward your own, doing your own thing, not being restrained by canon, using it to, if you need to break some things, break some things. But you've been with me a little over 50 minutes now, so I just wanted to kind of tell you my background and why I am less than guru, because I don't claim to be a great game designer. The one game that I actually designed didn't go anywhere, and it could be lots of reasons. I had no money. I could not promote it. Couldn't buy ads. Couldn't do anything at the time. YouTube either didn't exist or was in its infancy. It definitely wasn't on. The iPhone came out in 2008. I was published 2007, so it wasn't like you just get your phone like a little mini computer and do things. So it's just circumstance, time, everything. Is bad. It's not like I can say, ooh, I designed an edition of D&D, or ooh, I was actual Torg designer. No, I was a Torg author coming up with adventures. So in future videos, I want to go over different games that I've played, likes, dislikes, and maybe it'll give you ideas of what to do, because I still get ideas. And like I said before, sometimes you have something in your head and you kind of understand it, but you don't have a name, or it's not quite fully formed. And then when you talk to somebody, or you read something, you read a game master guide or something, and it like just solidifies. And that's really cool, I think. to take all the years of knowledge. We have the internet now, finally, finally, like it was something that people had planned on. But we are in a age where we can communicate globally, or near instantaneously, and we can share ideas, and we can have disagreements. We can have agreements. We can work middle grounds, or we can say, hey, you made a really good point, and I understand for you that's awesome. For me, it's not, but now that I know about it, I'm aware of it. And hopefully these videos that I hopefully will do, like I said, I have no time schedule, nothing kind of in a pipeline. I'm bored on a Saturday, so I'm going to make a YouTube video, I guess. No production values. But it's just me being honest, being truthful to myself and to you in the way that I view things. Like I said, I can be wrong on certain facts. If I say somebody published this on this date and it's not, and you show it to me, I'm wrong. I am happy to admit it. But when there's opinions, not every opinion is equal, because some people try to say that opinions are as good as facts, and I don't agree with that. But when it is actually a subjective matter that has no objectivity with it, there is a nice mix that even if you disagree with somebody in some principle, you can find something in tabletop role-playing game that, you know, might give you a bond. Like, I could hate a system. Like, if anybody would have asked me when I was, 12, 13 years old about D&D, I hated it. But my imagination was good, so I could talk to you about cool things. I could talk to you about fighters. I could, come up with stories with you and things like that. So I won't let this drag on any longer. Thank you for watching, and I am Zor Valachan, less than Guru.